and welcome to Crowain Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together. After my father died, I was at my mom and dad's house, helping my mom start figuring out all the things she had never really had to handle on her own before. My dad had taken care of almost everything for most of her adult life. He handled the money, the bills, the paperwork, the insurance, the healthcare details, and all the little adult responsibilities that can feel simple when someone else is carrying them, but overwhelming when they are suddenly dropped into your lap. My mom had depended on him for so long that after he passed, she was not only grieving the loss of her husband, she was also facing a whole new life that she did not know how to manage yet. It was one of those days that felt heavy from the moment it started. The house still felt like my dad, even though he was gone. His things were still around. His phone was still there. His presence was still in every room in that painful way that happens after someone dies. You look at a chair and remember them sitting there. You see something on a table and think about the last time they touched it. Even ordinary objects feel too important because they are connected to someone who is no longer there. Everything in the house felt normal and completely wrong at the same time. My uncle, my dad's brother, was there too, trying to help us sort through everything. He wanted to be useful. We all did. But it was not going well, mostly because nothing about that time was simple. There were papers everywhere, questions we did not know the answers to, accounts we had to figure out, calls that needed to be made, and decisions my mom was in no condition to handle. We were all still mourning, so even the smallest task felt harder than it should have. Something like calling a company, checking a policy, or finding a number could suddenly turn into a reminder that my dad was gone and would not be there to explain any of it. We were all sitting in the same room together. I remember that clearly because it matters later. Nobody was off somewhere else in the house. Nobody was upstairs. Nobody was in another room messing with anything. We were together trying to get through one step at a time. The mood was tense and sad. My mom was already fragile, and honestly, we all were. Grief has a way of making everything feel unstable. Like one wrong word or one small problem can make the whole day collapse. We had just made a phone call using my mom's phone. I do not remember exactly who the call was to. Probably someone connected to finances, healthcare, insurance, or one of the many things that had to be handled after my dad's death. What I do remember is the feeling after the call. It had not gone smoothly, or maybe it was just too much for my mom in that moment. She started crying. It was not just a few tears either. She was having a bit of a meltdown, which made sense. She had lost the person who had been beside her for so much of her life, and now she was expected to understand all these systems and responsibilities while her heart was still broken. I felt helpless watching her. My uncle was there too, and I think he felt the same way. We were trying to support her, but there is only so much you can do when someone is grieving that deeply. You can sit with them, speak gently, try to handle practical things, and tell them they are not alone, but you cannot fix the thing that is hurting them. My dad was gone. That was the truth underneath every phone call, every paper, every conversation. No amount of organizing could change that. Then my mom's phone started ringing. At first, that was not strange by itself. We had been making calls, so it would not have been unusual for someone to call back. But then we looked at the screen. My dad's name was lit up as the caller. For a second, everything stopped. It is hard to explain the feeling of seeing a dead person's name appear on a phone screen, especially when the death is still fresh and the grief is still raw. It does something to your stomach. Your mind knows they are gone, but your body reacts before logic can step in. The name is familiar. The name belongs to someone you love. For one impossible moment, a part of you wants to believe the impossible. Then, almost immediately, your brain starts fighting to explain it. My mom saw it too. My uncle saw it. I saw it. My dad's name was right there on the screen, calling my mom's phone. The first explanation we reached for was the most obvious one. We had my dad's phone there in the house as well, so we assumed maybe one of us had accidentally picked it up or touched it somehow. Maybe someone sat on it. Maybe it was pressed against something on the table. Maybe it somehow called her from recent calls. That would have been strange, but at least it would have made sense. Phones do weird things sometimes. Accidental calls happen. Grief makes people careless. We were all stressed and distracted, so it would not have been impossible for someone to have done it without realizing. But then we looked over at my dad's phone. It was sitting on an end table nearby. No one was touching it. No one was near it. It was just lying there. That was when the room changed. The explanation we had grabbed onto started slipping away. We were all in the same room. We could see each other. We could see the phone. It had not been picked up. It had not been handled. It was not in someone's pocket or under a cushion or being pressed by mistake. It was sitting there by itself on the end table, completely still. My mom's phone was still showing my dad's name. I cannot remember if anyone answered or if we were all too shocked. What I remember most is the silence and confusion that followed. We all stared at the phones, trying to make sense of something that should not have been happening. My dad had died. His phone was right there. My mom's phone was ringing with his name. No one had called from his phone. There was no obvious way for that call to exist. I picked up my dad's phone and checked the call logs. There was no record of the call. That made it worse. If his phone had somehow called my mom's phone, there should have been a record of it. Even if it had been accidental. Even if it had been a glitch. Even if one of us had somehow triggered it without touching it. The call should have shown up in the outgoing calls. But it did not. There was nothing there. No evidence that his phone had placed the call at all. Then I checked my mom's contacts. I thought maybe there was another person saved under the same name. My dad's name was a pretty common name, so it was not impossible that someone else in her contacts could have had that name too. Maybe an old friend, a relative, a business contact, someone connected to a doctor's office or an account. If there had been another person with the same name, then maybe the call could have been explained easily. It would still have been strange timing, but at least it would not have been impossible. But there were no other contacts with that name, only my dad. So that explanation disappeared too. I kept looking for something that would make sense. That is what I do when something strange happens. I try to find the normal answer first. Phones can glitch. Contacts can sync strangely. Numbers can be mislabeled. Spam calls can spoof numbers. Maybe some service or system had used his number somehow. Maybe the phone network had done something odd. Maybe there was a delayed call, a missed call, glitch, or some kind of strange technical issue. I am sure there must be a logical explanation somewhere, but in that moment, none of the simple ones worked. and the timing was what made it feel even more impossible. My mom had just started crying. She was overwhelmed, scared, and breaking down because she did not know how she was going to handle everything without my dad. Then her phone rang, and his name appeared. It did not happen randomly while everyone was calm. It did not happen days earlier when no one was thinking about anything specific. It happened right as she was falling apart, right when she needed comfort the most. That is why my mom believed it was my dad. To her, it felt like he was trying to tell her everything was going to be okay. It felt like he saw her struggling and somehow reached out in the only way he could. A phone call from his name at that exact moment, while his actual phone sat untouched nearby. To my mom, that was not just a glitch. It was a message. Maybe not a message with words, but still a message. A sign that he was there in some way. A sign that she was not as alone as she felt. I did not know what to think. Part of me wanted to believe that, too, because it was comforting. After losing someone, you look for signs even when you do not mean to. You notice little things. A song comes on at the right moment. A bird lands nearby. A light flickers. A smell reminds you of them. Sometimes those things feel like coincidence, and sometimes they feel like more. Grief makes you open to possibilities you may not have considered before. It makes you want to believe love can still reach across whatever distance death creates. But another part of me kept trying to stay logical. There had to be an explanation. There had to be some phone issue, some contact problem, some weird technical thing that we just did not understand. I did not want to jump straight to ghosts or the afterlife. I wanted facts. I checked the phones. I checked the call logs. I checked the contacts. I looked for the mistake. I could not find one. My uncle's reaction is one of the reasons the memory has stayed with me. He does not believe in ghosts, the afterlife, spirits, signs, or anything like that. He is not the kind of person who would make a paranormal story out of nothing. If anything, he would usually be the first person to dismiss something strange and explain it away. But after that phone call, he was completely speechless. He had seen it with us. He had been in the room. He knew no one touched my dad's phone. He knew my mom's phone showed my dad's name. He knew the call log did not show the call coming from my dad's phone. And because he witnessed the whole thing, he could not just laugh it off or say we were imagining it. Later, he told me that he would not have believed it happened if he had not been there to see it himself. That means a lot coming from someone like him. It is one thing for a grieving person to believe they received a sign. People might say grief makes you see what you want to see. But it is different when someone skeptical, someone who does not believe in that kind of thing, stands there and has no answer. He was not eager to call it supernatural. He was not trying to make the story bigger than it was. He simply could not deny what had happened in front of him. The whole thing left us with this strange feeling in the room. My mom was still grieving, of course, but the phone call shifted something. It did not fix anything. It did not bring my dad back. It did not solve the problems with finances, healthcare, paperwork, or the hard life changes she had to face. But it created a pause in the middle of all that pain. For a moment, everything stopped, and the only thing we could focus on was his name glowing on her phone. I have thought about it so many times since then. I have wondered if there was some hidden technical explanation. Maybe phone numbers can be spoofed in ways that look like a contact is calling. Maybe there was a glitch from a previous call. Maybe my mom's phone somehow displayed the wrong contact name. Maybe a call came from a number connected to my dad in some old way. Maybe there was a network delay or some strange system issue. I know modern phones and networks are not perfect. Strange things do happen, but none of those explanations have ever felt fully satisfying because of all the details together. His phone was there. No one touched it. There was no outgoing call in his log. There was no other contact with his name. My uncle saw it. My mom was crying at that exact moment. The call came when she needed comfort most. Maybe that is coincidence. Maybe it is not. That is the part I still cannot settle. I do not know what happens after people die. I do not claim to know. I have no proof that my dad reached out from somewhere beyond this world. I also have no proof that he did not. Before something like that happens, it is easy to have a clear opinion. You either believe or you do not. But when you experience something that does not fit neatly into your beliefs, it becomes harder. You can still be logical, but the memory stays there, quietly challenging you. I think about my dad and the life he had built with my mom. She had leaned on him for so many years. He had been the person who knew what to do, who had the answers, who took care of the practical things. Then he was suddenly gone, and she was sitting there in the same house, crying because the weight of everything felt too big. If he could have comforted her, I believe he would have. If there were any way for him to tell her she would be okay, he would have tried. Maybe that call was nothing more than a strange phone glitch. But if it was him, the timing was perfect. It was not a long message. It was not a voice from beyond the grave. It was not something dramatic like in a movie. It was just his name on her phone. But sometimes a name is enough. Sometimes seeing the name of someone you love at the exact moment you feel like you cannot keep going is enough to make you breathe for one more second. For my mom, I think that is what it did. It felt like reassurance. Like he was saying, I know this is hard. I know you are scared. But you are not alone. For me, it remains one of the strangest things I have ever witnessed. The practical part of my mind still looks for the explanation. It still wants to solve it like a puzzle. It still wants to say, this happened because of this specific technical issue. But the emotional part of me remembers the room, my mom crying, my uncle frozen, my dad's phone sitting untouched on the end table, and my mom's phone lighting up with his name. That part of me understands why she believed it was him. My uncle's silence stays with me too. If he had brushed it off, maybe I would have eventually done the same. But he did not. He could not. He stood there with the rest of us, faced with something he did not believe in and could not explain. Later, when he admitted he would not have believed it if he had not witnessed it, it confirmed that I was not making the memory bigger than it was. It really had been that strange. Grief is already full of unanswered questions. Where did they go? Can they hear us? Do they know we missed them? Are they still close in some way? Most of the time, we do not get anything that feels like an answer. We just keep living with the silence they leave behind. That day, for a few seconds, the silence broke in the strangest way. A phone rang. My dad's name appeared. And then, the mystery stayed. I still do not know what to make of it. I am sure there is probably some logical explanation somewhere, but I have never been able to find one that fits everything. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe the technology did something strange at the exact worst and best possible moment. Or maybe my mom was right, and my dad was trying to tell her that everything was going to be okay. I cannot say for certain. All I know is that after my father died, while we were sitting in my parents' house trying to help my mom face a life without him, her phone rang with his name on the screen. His own phone was sitting untouched nearby. There was no record of the call in his phone. There was no other contact with his name. My skeptical uncle saw it happen and had no words. And years later, I still have no real explanation for it. I technically died. My heart stopped. It happened after a complicated birth, after I had just brought a baby into the world and my own body started losing the fight. I bled out, and even after all these years, there are pieces of that day that still come back to me with a clarity that feels almost unreal. Some parts are sharp and detailed, like the face of the midwife near my head. Other parts are blurred by fear, blood loss, and whatever happens to the mind when the body is shutting down. But I remember enough to know that something happened to me that I still cannot fully explain. I remember lying there after the birth, weak and cold in a way I had never felt before. There was a midwife by my head, and I can still picture the look on her face. She looked scared, but not just scared in the usual way medical staff might look when things are urgent. She looked sad, too. It was like she was trying very hard to stay professional, but her face could not hide how bad things were. She kept talking to me, trying to keep me focused, trying to keep me there. I remember her voice more than the words at first. It was steady, but underneath it, I could hear fear. I told her my limbs felt like ice. The second I said that, her face changed. She looked horrified, and that was when I understood, in some deep, quiet part of myself, that this was not just a normal complication. Something was seriously wrong. She kept shouting at the doctors to hurry up. There was movement around me. People trying to work quickly, trying to figure out what needed to happen next. The room had that frantic feeling of emergency, but I was oddly separated from it. I could see and hear pieces of it, but my own mind had started to slow down in a strange way. They could not find my records. This was before everything was as digital and easy to access as it is now. So there was confusion, delay, and panic over things that today might have been handled much faster. I was bleeding out, and somehow they did not have the information they needed right in front of them. I remember a doctor asking me what my blood type was. Even in that state, I knew the answer, so I told him. Then he said, in an angry voice, "I can't trust you. You're the patient." I remember being so shocked and furious that I shouted back, "Why fucking ask then?" It was such an absurd moment. I was lying there, dying or nearly dying, freezing from the inside out, and a doctor had asked me a question, only to tell me he could not trust the answer. Even now, I can look back and think how messed up that whole exchange was. But in the middle of it, it was almost funny in the darkest way possible. The midwife smiled when I said that. Only briefly, just for a second, but she smiled. I think she was relieved to hear some fight still in me. Maybe that little burst of anger told her I was still present, still myself, still holding on. She held my head and kept talking to me. She said all sorts of things, anything to keep me engaged and awake. At one point, she told me I looked like I would like Shakira. Even in that horrible moment, I laughed. My mind already felt different by then, almost like it was not fully attached to the panic in the room. I told her no, that I was mostly a metal fan. It was such a strange conversation to have while my body was failing. A midwife holding my head, trying to keep me alive, talking about Shakira while I corrected her about my taste in music. It sounds ridiculous when I tell it, but it happened. It was funny and awful and surreal all at once. But that conversation is not really why I am telling this. The thing that stays with me most is what happened as the cold took over. It started in my limbs and crept upward. That is the best way I can describe it. It was not like simply feeling chilly. It was like the cold was moving through my body with a purpose, taking over inch by inch. My arms and legs felt distant, icy, almost no longer mine. You would think something like that would be terrifying and Part of it was, especially when I saw the fear on the faces around me, that inside myself, something strange began to happen. I did not feel pain. My mind became calm. Not happy, exactly, but calm in a way that did not match the situation at all. There was shouting around me. There were doctors and staff moving quickly. There was blood loss and confusion and danger. I had just had a baby. I was very young. There was absolutely no part of me as a person that wanted to die. I had every reason to fight. I had a newborn baby who needed me. I had a life that, no matter how painful or chaotic it had been, was still mine. I did not want it to end. But the blood loss did something to me. It made death feel acceptable. That is hard to admit, because people imagine death as this thing you fight against with every part of yourself until the final second. Maybe sometimes it is like that. But for me, as the cold moved through me, my mind felt at ease. It felt like if this was what was happening, then it was okay. I did not feel the panic I think I should have felt. I did not feel like I was clawing at life. I was just drifting, and there was a quiet acceptance in it that still unsettles me when I think about it now. Then I drifted further. At some point, I was gone. I remember utter blackness. It was not like closing your eyes in a dark room. It was not the darkness of nighttime or sleep. It was deeper than that. There was a kind of darkness I had never experienced before and have never experienced since. It felt complete. There was no light, no shape, no color, no sound in the normal sense. But somehow, I was still aware. That is the part I still struggle to explain. I was not seeing anything, but I existed in that blackness. I was not hearing anything, but I sensed something around me. I could sense people. I could not speak. I could not touch. I could not hear voices. I could not see faces. But I knew I was not alone. There were others around me somehow, and with them came this sense of sadness. It was not terror. It was not peace either. It was sadness, heavy and quiet. I felt like there were people nearby, but I could not reach them. I kept trying to communicate with them. I do not know how I was trying, because I did not have a voice or a body in the normal way. But I remember the effort. I remember wanting to make contact, wanting to say something, wanting to understand who was there and why I could feel them. I could not figure it out. It was like being trapped behind a wall with people on the other side, except there was no wall, no room, no body, and no sound. Only blackness and the knowledge that I was not alone. I do not know how long it lasted. Time did not work normally there. It could have been seconds. It could have been much longer. I only know that I was in that darkness, trying and failing to reach the people I could sense around me. Then I woke up. I came back to the world in pieces. There was a machine warming blood as it pumped it back into my body. I had stitches inside and out. My body had been through something massive, something violent and dangerous, and I was suddenly back inside it. The cold was not the same anymore. The room existed again. The medical equipment existed. The people existed. Life existed. The first thing I said was, "Give me my baby, please." Apparently, I was very determined about it. That makes me laugh a little now, because of course I was. I had just come back from whatever that was, and the first thing I wanted was my child. I had almost died, or maybe I did die for a moment, but my mind went straight to my baby. Not the blood, not the stitches, not the fear, not the doctors. My baby. I needed to know they were real. I needed to hold them. I needed to be their mother. A day later, the midwife who had been there when it happened came to my hospital room. She held my hand, and she was teary-eyed. She told me she had never seen anyone come back from being that far gone. She told me I was special. She told me I deserved more from my life. That hit me hard in a way I do not think I could fully explain to her. My life had been chaotic and painful, and in many ways it still was for a long time after that. Only now, years later, it has finally started getting better. But back then, hearing someone say I deserved more felt different. It was not just a nice thing to say. It felt like she had seen me at the very edge of life and still believed I was worth pulling back. She told me she would make sure she got to walk me out of the hospital. And she did. That meant something to me. It still does. She had been there when I was dying. She had held my head. She had talked to me. She had tried to keep me in the room when my body was slipping away. And then, when I was well enough to leave, she walked me out. It felt like a circle closing. She had been there at the edge, and she was there when I stepped back into the world. She told me she had willed me to live. Even when the doctors wanted to give up, she refused to let me go in her heart. I do not know exactly what that means medically. Maybe it did not change anything in a scientific way. Maybe the doctors, the blood, the machines, and the procedures brought me back. And that was all. Maybe it was random. Maybe I survived because my body responded at the right time and the right treatment worked. I understand all of that. But I also know what it felt like. It felt like she held me here. Maybe not with her hands, not literally, but with something deeper. Her voice, her presence, her refusal to give up on me, her hand on my head, the way she kept speaking to me like I was still there. Maybe that mattered. Maybe when I was drifting, some part of me could still feel that someone on this side was not willing to let go. My own mother had abandoned me. That is a painful thing to say, but it is true. I did not have the kind of mother standing there for me that I should have had. And in that moment, this midwife filled that space in a way I will never forget. She felt like how a mother should feel. Protective, present, loving without needing to be asked. She was not my family, but she stood there like she was. She fought for me with a tenderness I had not always been given in life. There was a connection between us. I still think about her often. I tried to find her later, but I could not. That hurts in its own quiet way. There are people who pass through your life for only a short time and still change it forever. She was one of those people for me. I wish I could tell her how often I remember her. I wish I could tell her that when I think of surviving, I think of her face beside me, scared and sad, still trying to make me laugh, still refusing to let me vanish. Another strange thing happened, too. My actual mother rang the hospital. This was not normal. We had not had any contact for years. She had moved to a different country. She did not know my life in any close way. She should not have known where I was. She should not have known I had been pregnant. I had not told anyone who knew her. There was no obvious chain of information that should have led her to that hospital at that exact time. And yet she called. She rang and asked about me because she had a gut feeling that I was dead or dying. That still gives me chills. How did she know which hospital to call? How did she know I was there? How did she know I had been pregnant? How did she call at that moment, after years of no contact, from a different country, with the feeling that something terrible had happened to me? I do not have an answer. I have tried to think of one. Maybe someone told someone who told someone else. Maybe there was some connection I did not know about. Maybe it was coincidence. But it did not feel like coincidence. When the staff told me she had called, I told them to tell her I was okay, but that I did not want to talk to her. That might sound cold to some people, but it was what I needed. I had just almost died. I had just had a baby. I had been through something so big that I barely had the strength to exist, let alone reopen years of pain with someone who had abandoned me. I could acknowledge the strangeness of her knowing something was wrong and still protect myself from speaking to her. Both things were true at once. The whole experience has stayed with me for years. I still wonder about the blackness. I still wonder about the people I sensed around me. I still wonder whether I was actually somewhere, or whether my dying brain created that place out of fading signals and lack of oxygen. I know there are medical explanations people can give. Blood loss, shock, the brain shutting down, hallucinations, chemicals, memories forming strangely during trauma. I understand that those explanations exist, and maybe they are right. But knowing that does not erase what I remember. I remember the cold taking my limbs. I remember the calm. I remember accepting death, even though I did not want to die. I remember the blackness that was darker than anything I have ever known. I remember sensing others around me and feeling sadness. I remember trying to communicate and not knowing how. I remember waking up to warm blood being pumped back into my body. I remember demanding my baby. I remember the midwife returning to my room with tears in her eyes and telling me I was special. I remember her walking me out. I remember my mother calling from another country because something inside her told her I was dying. I do not know what to do with all of that. Some people might say it was all medical. Some might say it was spiritual. Some might say the midwife's love kept me here. Some might say my mother had some strange instinct, some deep connection that woke up at the exact moment I was slipping away. I do not know. I cannot prove any of it. I can only say what happened and how it felt. And how it felt was like I went to the edge of something and came back. It did not feel like a dream. It did not feel like ordinary sleep. It felt like absence, darkness, sadness, and then return. It felt like I had gone somewhere I was not supposed to stay. Or maybe somewhere I was not ready to stay. I had a baby waiting for me. I had more life to live, even if that life was painful and chaotic for a long time. Maybe I deserved more from life, like the midwife said. Maybe part of me needed to come back to find it. I still think about that woman, the midwife. I think about how she stood in for a mother when mine was not there. I think about how she held my head and spoke to me through fear. I think about how she smiled when I swore at the doctor. I think about her trying to keep me connected to normal human things, even ridiculous things like Shakira and music, while my body was bleeding out. I think about her telling me she refused to let me go. Maybe that is not how life and death work. But maybe, in some way, it is. Maybe we are held here not only by machines and blood and medicine, but also by the people who refuse to stop seeing us as alive. Maybe her voice reached some part of me that was drifting. Maybe the sadness I sensed in the darkness was connected to the people around me in that room. Maybe I was not as alone as I thought. I came back, and the first thing I wanted was my baby. That tells me something too. Whatever peace or darkness I touched, whatever calm came with dying, life still called me back through love. My child was here. My body was broken, stitched inside and out, and full of blood that had to be warmed and returned to me. But I was alive. I had survived something that even the midwife said she had never seen anyone come back from. Years later, I still wonder about it all. I wonder why I felt calm. I wonder who or what I sensed in the darkness. I wonder whether my mother really felt me dying from another country. I wonder whether the midwife's will and love helped hold me here. I wonder why I came back when it seemed like I was gone. I do not have answers. I only have the memory of dying. the memory of returning, and the feeling that, for reasons I may never understand, something or someone was not finished with me yet. My dad, my brother, and I went fishing on a lake one night. It was one of those simple family trips that did not seem like it was going to turn into anything strange. We were just going out to fish, spend some time together, and enjoy being away from everything for a while. Nothing about it felt unusual at first. It was just us, the water, the boat, the dark sky, and the quiet that comes when you are far enough from town that the normal noise of life fades away. We had gone out in the evening, and the lake was calm when we first got there. The air had that cool feeling that comes near the water after the sun starts going down. It was not freezing, but it was cool enough that you could feel it on your arms and face. The kind of weather that makes the lake feel quiet and wide open. The surface of the water moved gently around us, and every little sound seemed to carry farther than usual. You could hear the small sounds of the boat, the fishing lines, the water tapping against the side, and the occasional movement somewhere out in the dark. My brother did not last very long out there. After about 30 minutes, he started saying he did not feel good. I do not remember if it was his stomach, his head, or just that overall sick feeling where you know you do not want to be sitting in a boat anymore. Either way, he was done. He wanted to go back to land and rest in the car. My dad and I understood. Sometimes fishing is peaceful. But if you feel sick, being out on the water only makes it worse. The rocking of the boat, the damp air, the darkness, all of it can make you feel even more uncomfortable. So we took him back to shore. He got out and went to sleep in the car while my dad and I stayed out on the lake. At the time, that felt completely normal. My brother was safe on land, and he could rest while we kept fishing. My dad and I still wanted to stay out a little longer, and the night was quiet enough that it felt worth it. We headed back out and settled into the slow rhythm of fishing again. For a long time, nothing much happened. That is how fishing usually is. You sit there waiting, watching the water, feeling every little tug or movement in the line, wondering if it is a fish or just the water playing tricks on you. Sometimes you talk. Sometimes you sit in silence. Sometimes the silence is the best part. My dad and I were out there for hours, just waiting and enjoying the night. We stayed until around midnight, maybe a little after, and by then the whole lake felt different. At night, a lake can feel peaceful, but it can also feel strange. The darkness makes it seem much bigger. The shore feels farther away than it really is. If there are trees around, they become black shapes against the sky. If there are clouds, they cover parts of the stars and make everything feel closed in. You are out there floating in the middle of dark water, and even if you are with someone, you still feel small. That is not always a bad feeling. Sometimes it is relaxing. But it can also make you more aware of anything that does not belong. I had not caught anything all night, and then around midnight I finally caught my first fish. I remember that clearly because it was the kind of moment that wakes you up after hours of waiting. 1 second, everything was quiet and slow, and the next second there was movement on the line. I reacted quickly, and my dad helped me deal with it. There was excitement in that moment, the normal rush you get when something finally happens after sitting there for so long. It felt like the whole night had been building toward that little moment. We got the fish in, handled it, and put it back in the water. It all happened pretty fast, but it was enough to make the night feel alive again. The water moved as the fish went back under, and for a second, I was just happy. It was my first fish of the night, and I was out there with my dad. It should have been the thing I remembered most about that fishing trip, but it was not. Almost immediately after we dealt with the fish and released it, we looked up. I do not even remember exactly why we looked up at that moment. Maybe it was just one of those natural things you do after something exciting happens, like your attention shifts from what is right in front of you to everything around you. Maybe there was a change in the light. Maybe something in the sky caught the corner of my eye. I cannot say for sure. But my dad and I both looked up toward a gap in the clouds. The sky was not completely clear that night. There were clouds moving across it, with breaks here and there where you could see through to the darker sky beyond. Through one of those gaps, we saw something that should not have been there. There was a massive ship in the sky. I do not mean a plane. I do not mean a helicopter. I do not mean a bright star or a satellite. I mean something huge, something shaped like a craft of some kind, just hovering above us in the sky. It had lights on it, white, red, and green. Those colors stood out against the darkness. At first, my brain tried to make it into something normal, because that is what your brain does when it sees something impossible. It tries to fix the image. It tries to turn it into something it already understands. But I could not make it normal. This thing was freaking massive. It is hard to explain the size, because there was nothing right beside it to compare it to, but it felt huge. Not just big like a low-flying plane, huge in a way that made my stomach drop. It took up space in the sky like it had no business being there. It was not moving across the sky the way aircraft usually do. It was just hovering, hanging there, still and silent. That was one of the strangest parts. Something that large should have made noise. If it had been a plane that close or that big, we should have heard engines. If it had been a helicopter, we should have heard the blades. But I do not remember any sound from it at all. Just the lake, the night, and that enormous shape above us. The lights made it easier to see parts of it, but not the whole thing clearly. Because of the clouds and the angle, I could only see one side of it. That made it even harder to understand. It was like looking at part of an enormous object through a window that opened in the sky for only a short time. I kept trying to focus on it, trying to make sense of the shape. The more I looked, the less it resembled anything ordinary. When I tried to take a closer look, I could make out these jagged, rectangular edges on it. They were not smooth like the body of a normal airplane. They looked blocky, like different sections or pieces connected together. There seemed to be gaps between parts of it, like the whole thing was made from separate rectangular sections with spaces between them. It did not look like one clean, rounded object. It looked strange and mechanical, but in a way that did not match anything I had ever seen. The best way I can describe the shape is that it looked kind of like a blocky horseshoe. Not a perfect horseshoe, and not something simple like a U shape drawn in the sky, but that is the closest comparison I can give. It had that curved or open feeling to it, but made out of heavy, rectangular pieces. Again, I could only see one side of it, so I cannot say exactly what the full shape was. Maybe if I had been looking at it from a different angle, it would have looked completely different. But from where we were in the boat, with the clouds partly blocking it, it looked like a huge, blocky, horseshoe-shaped craft hovering in the sky. For a few seconds, I could not move. I just stared. My mind was racing, but at the same time, it felt blank. I could not explain what I was seeing, and because I could not explain it, my brain almost refused to accept it. It was like seeing something that did not fit into the world. You look at it, and some part of you says, no, that cannot be right. That cannot be there. But your eyes keep telling you it is. The lights were there. The edges were there. The shape was there. It was not a dream. It was not something I saw alone. My dad was right beside me, looking at the same thing. That part matters to me more than anything. If I had been alone, I probably would have doubted myself for the rest of my life. I would have wondered if I was tired, if I had mistaken the clouds for something else, if the excitement of catching the fish had made my imagination run wild. But my dad saw it too. He was standing or sitting right there with me, looking up at that same gap in the clouds, seeing the same impossible thing in the sky. And then, somehow, the gigantic ship began to fade away. It did not shoot off into the distance. It did not fly away at high speed. It did not make a sound and vanish like a jet disappearing over the horizon. It literally faded. Right before my eyes, the object started becoming less visible. The lights and the shape seemed to lose strength, like it was being erased from the sky. I do not know how else to describe it. It was there, massive, and clear enough to see, and then it was fading into nothing. That was the moment the fear really hit me. Seeing it hovering was already terrifying, because it made no sense. But watching it fade away was worse, because that destroyed any chance of a normal explanation. A plane does not fade out like that. A helicopter does not hover silently and then dissolve. A cloud might cover something, but this did not feel like the clouds simply moved in front of it. It looked like the thing itself was disappearing, like it was becoming transparent, or turning off, or leaving in some way that did not involve normal movement. I kept staring, trying to hold on to it with my eyes, trying to see where it went. But it kept fading, until there was nothing left to see. The gap in the clouds was still there, the sky was still there, but the massive object was gone. It had vanished so completely that the sky almost looked normal again. Almost, but once you see something like that, the sky never feels normal in the same way, at least not in that moment. I looked over at my dad. The look on his face told me everything. He had seen it too. His face looked exactly like mine felt. Shocked, confused, scared, completely unable to process what had just happened. We both had that same wide-eyed, frozen expression people get when they have seen something that does not fit reality. For a second, neither of us had a proper sentence. We just shared this terrified, silent understanding. Then the words came out. Basically, at the same time. What the fuck? That was the only thing that made sense to say. There was no calm explanation, no thoughtful discussion, no scientific breakdown. Just that raw reaction. Because what else do you say when you are sitting on a lake at midnight and a massive blocky ship appears in the sky, hovers there, and then fades away? We stayed there for a moment, still looking up, still expecting something else to happen. I think part of me thought it might come back. Maybe it would reappear in another gap in the clouds. Maybe it had moved somewhere else. Maybe the lights would show again. But there was nothing. Just the dark sky, the clouds, and the quiet lake around us. The whole world seemed to have returned to normal, but we had not. I remember feeling exposed out there on the water. A few minutes earlier, the lake had felt peaceful. After seeing that thing, it felt like the worst possible place to be. We were in a small boat, far from shore, under a sky where something impossible had just appeared. There was nowhere to hide. No roof over us. No walls. Just open water and open sky. I suddenly became very aware of how small we were. If that thing had been real, and I still believe it was because we both saw it, then we had been sitting beneath something massive with no idea it was there until we happened to look up. That thought made my skin crawl. My dad and I started talking, but it was not really talking in a normal way. It was more like both of us trying to confirm what we had just seen. We kept asking each other questions we could not answer. Did you see that? What was that? How big was it? Did it just disappear? Did it fade? Did it make any noise? We were both trying to line up our memories in real time, because we knew that if we did not, the experience might start to feel unreal later. But we both knew. We had seen the same thing. The lights were one of the details we kept coming back to. White, red, and green. Those are colors you see on aircraft sometimes, so at first glance, someone might say it had to be a plane. But everything else about it was wrong. The size was wrong. The shape was wrong. The way it hovered was wrong. The way it faded away was completely wrong. And the silence was wrong. Nothing about it behaved like a normal aircraft. The shape stayed in my mind, too. Those rectangular edges. Those gaps between pieces. That blocky, horseshoe-like form. It did not look like a smooth flying saucer from a movie, and it did not look like a normal military aircraft either. It looked like something constructed in sections, like huge pieces joined together in a shape I did not understand. It was not beautiful or graceful. It looked strange, heavy, and impossible. I do not know how long we stayed out there after that. It might not have been long at all. Once something like that happens, time feels weird. A few seconds can feel like minutes, and the next 10 minutes can vanish from memory. I know the night had changed completely. The excitement of catching my first fish was gone. The calm of fishing with my dad was gone. All we could think about was the thing in the sky. Eventually, we went back toward land. I do not remember if we packed up immediately or if we sat there a little longer trying to convince ourselves to calm down. But I know the ride back felt different from the ride out. The darkness around the lake no longer felt peaceful. Every gap in the clouds felt suspicious. Every light in the distance made me tense. I kept wanting to look up, but I also did not want to see it again. That is a strange kind of fear, wanting proof and wanting safety at the same time. When we got back to shore, my brother was still in the car. He had missed the entire thing because he had felt sick and gone to sleep. I have thought about that many times. If he had stayed out with us, there would have been 3 witnesses instead of 2. But maybe it happened exactly because it was just me and my dad out there. I do not know. I only know that my brother did not see it, and my dad and I did. Trying to explain it later was almost impossible. Words make it sound smaller than it was. If you say, "We saw a ship in the sky," people imagine something from a movie, or they think you are exaggerating. If you say, "It had lights," they think plane. If you say it faded away, they start looking for ways to explain it as clouds or reflections or tired eyes. But none of those explanations match what it felt like to actually be there, looking up at it with another person beside you who was just as terrified as you were. The most unsettling part is that we were not trying to see anything. We were not out there looking for UFOs. We were not telling scary stories or staring at the sky all night waiting for something weird. We were fishing. We were doing the most ordinary thing in the world. I had just caught a fish, we had released it, and then we looked up. That was it. One normal moment led straight into something I still cannot explain. That is what makes it harder to dismiss. There was no build-up, no reason for our minds to invent the same thing at the same time, no strange mood that made us expect something. We were focused on the fish, then the sky, and suddenly, there it was. I have wondered if it could have been some kind of military aircraft or experimental craft. Maybe there are things out there that regular people do not know about. Maybe what we saw was human-made, some massive aircraft being tested at night. But even that explanation has problems. Why would something that large be hovering silently over a lake? Why would it fade away instead of flying away? Why would it appear through a gap in the clouds and then vanish so smoothly? I cannot make it fit. I have wondered if the clouds played a trick on us. Maybe there were lights from somewhere else reflecting off them. Maybe the shape was a shadow. But my dad and I both saw edges, gaps, and a form that looked solid. It did not look like a random cloud pattern. It looked like an object, and those lights were attached to it, placed on it, part of it. I cannot explain that away easily. I have also wondered if it was something else entirely, something not from here or not operating in a way we understand. I do not love saying that because it sounds extreme, but after seeing what we saw, I cannot fully rule it out either. There are moments in life where your normal beliefs stretch because your experience does not fit inside them anymore. That night was one of those moments for me. The image has stayed with me ever since. The dark lake, the quiet after midnight. My brother asleep back on land. My dad beside me. The gap in the clouds. The huge shape in the sky with white, red, and green lights. The jagged rectangular edges. The blocky horseshoe form. The way it hovered like it was not affected by anything around it. The way it faded until the sky was empty again. And then my dad's face. That is the part that proves it to me every time I think back on it. I did not just see something and then convince myself later that it was strange. I looked at my dad, and he had the exact same expression I had. He was not laughing. He was not brushing it off. He was not saying it was a plane or telling me not to worry. He was just as shocked as I was. Just as confused. Just as scared. We both knew we had seen something we were not supposed to see, or at least something we were never going to understand. I do not know what was in the sky that night. I do not know where it came from, why it was there, or how it disappeared. I do not know if it was a craft, a UFO, some secret aircraft, or something beyond anything I can name. I only know what my dad and I saw with our own eyes. A massive ship-like object hovered in the sky over the lake, lit with white, red, and green lights, shaped in a strange blocky form, and then faded away right in front of us. We went fishing that night, expecting nothing more than a quiet evening on the lake. My brother got sick and slept in the car. I caught my first fish around midnight, and then, within moments of putting it back in the water, my dad and I looked up and saw something so huge and impossible that all we could do was stare at each other and say, "What the fuck?" I have never forgotten it. I do not think I ever will. Forgive me for stepping in for just a moment. If you've only recently found your way here, then welcome. I'm glad you came. If these stories are keeping you company tonight, consider subscribing to Crowain Manor. New stories arrive here often, the kind that stay with you long after the night is over. And if you tap the bell, you won't have to go looking. The next one will find you on its own. Thank you for being here. Now, let's return to where we left off. My parents had gone out, and I was home alone upstairs on the computer. I do not remember exactly what I was doing, but it was probably something normal, the kind of thing you do when you finally have the house to yourself for a little while. I was not scared at first. I was not expecting anything strange to happen. It was just a regular day or evening, and I was in the upstairs living room, sitting at the computer, minding my own business. The house felt normal in the beginning. When you are home alone, you notice little sounds more than usual, but there was nothing that made me nervous at first. Maybe the house creaked here and there, maybe the air conditioner or heater made some noise, maybe there were the usual quiet sounds that come from rooms around you. None of it felt unusual. I knew my parents had left, and I knew I was by myself, but I was comfortable enough to sit there and use the computer without thinking much about it. Then I heard a thud at the door to the upstairs living room. It was not a tiny sound, and it was not something I could easily ignore. It sounded like something had hit the door or been dropped right outside it. The sound was sudden enough to pull my attention away from the computer immediately. I remember that feeling of stopping whatever I was doing and listening. When you are alone in a house and you hear something unexpected right outside the room you are in, your mind starts trying to explain it very quickly. Maybe something fell. Maybe the house shifted. Maybe one of my parents had come back and I had not heard them come in. Maybe it was nothing, but the sound had come from the door. I got up and went to open it. I do not think I was terrified yet, but I was definitely curious and maybe a little uneasy. There should not have been anything outside that door. I was supposed to be alone. Still, I opened it, expecting to see maybe something that had fallen over, or maybe nothing at all. When I opened the door, I saw a stuffed toy on the floor. It was just sitting there, right outside the door, like someone had tossed it or dropped it there. I still have that toy to this day, which makes the whole memory even stranger for me. It was not something I dreamed about or imagined and then forgot. It was physical. It was there. I could pick it up. I could hold it. And even now, all these years later, I still have it. That part has always bothered me because it means something real was involved, not just a weird feeling or a shadow in the corner of my eye. I looked at the toy first, confused. I did not know where it had come from or why it was there. Then I looked up. Down the hallway, I saw a man. He was peeping from the doorway to another room, looking out at me from around the edge. He had white hair, a white beard, glasses, and he was wearing a Santa hat. He looked like Santa Claus, or at least like someone trying to appear that way. That was the first thing my mind connected him to. White hair, beard, glasses, Santa hat. It was such a strange and specific image that I did not fully understand what I was seeing at first. A man was in my house. That should have been the first thought, and maybe it was somewhere deep inside me, but because of how he looked. My brain did not react the way it would have if I had seen a random stranger in dark clothes. He looked familiar in a way, not because I knew him, but because the image of Santa is familiar to a child. It is friendly. It is supposed to be safe. It is supposed to belong to stories, presents, Christmas, and childhood. So instead of immediately screaming or running, I was confused. I was trying to understand why someone who looked like Santa Claus was peeking at me from another room in my own house. I picked up the stuffed toy and started making my way down the hall toward the room where I had seen him. Looking back, that part scares me. I do not know why I walked toward him. If I were hearing this story from someone else, I would wonder why they did not run or call for help. But when something so strange happens, your brain does not always choose the smartest response. I think the toy made it feel less threatening at first. It was like he had left me something. Maybe, in my young mind, that made the situation seem more magical than dangerous. I had seen a man who looked like Santa, and there was a toy at the door. That was enough to confuse me instead of making me fully afraid. The hallway felt different as I walked down it. A few seconds earlier, it had just been part of my house. Now it felt long and strange, like every step was taking me deeper into something I did not understand. I was holding the toy, looking toward the doorway where I had seen him peeking out. I could not see him clearly anymore from that angle, but I knew he had been there. I had seen his face, his white hair, his beard, the glasses, and the red Santa hat. As I got closer, I expected to find him in the room. I expected maybe to see him standing there, or maybe crouched or hiding, or maybe just waiting. The whole thing still felt unreal, but not in a way that made me doubt it. It felt unreal because it was happening inside a normal house where things like that are not supposed to happen. Then I turned the corner and faced the doorway. A giant man was standing there. He was as wide and as tall as the door frame, almost filling it. He was not just a normal-sized person in a Santa hat anymore. He looked huge. The kind of huge that makes you feel very small very quickly. He looked down at me from the doorway, and I remember how overwhelming his size felt. It was not just that he was tall. It was that he seemed to take up the whole space, like the doorframe could barely contain him. I was standing there with the stuffed toy, looking up at this enormous man who should not have been in my house. He did not speak. Instead, he lifted one finger to his mouth and made a quiet gesture, like he was telling me to be quiet. That gesture is one of the parts I remember most clearly. A finger pressed to his mouth, telling me not to make noise. It should have been comforting if it had come from someone safe, but from him it felt strange and wrong. Why would he want me to be quiet? Why was he in the house? Why had he left the toy? Why was he hiding or waiting in that room? Why did he look like Santa Claus? And why was he so large? I do not remember screaming. I do not remember running. I think I was too shocked. There are moments when fear does not come out as a loud reaction. Sometimes it freezes inside you because the thing in front of you is too confusing to process. I was trying to fit what I was seeing into something I understood, but it did not fit. A Santa-looking man inside the house while my parents were gone. A toy appearing at the door. A giant figure filling the doorway. The quiet gesture. Then I heard someone coming up the stairs. That sound snapped the moment open. My parents had come home. I looked back and saw my mom. She saw me standing there, and she asked what I was doing. She also asked where I had gotten the toy from. That question matters because the toy was real. She saw it. It was in my hands. It had not been there before, and now I was holding it in the hallway. To me, the answer was obvious in that moment because I had just seen the man. I told her, "Look, Santa Claus is here." Then I turned back toward the doorway. He was gone. There was nobody there. The giant man who had been standing in the doorway, looking down at me and telling me to be quiet, had disappeared. The room was empty. The doorway was just a doorway again. The hallway was just a hallway again. Everything suddenly looked normal, and that made it even more frightening. A second before, he had been there. I had seen him clearly. I had seen his white hair, his beard, his glasses, his Santa hat, and his massive size. Then my parents came upstairs, and he was gone. My mom did not treat it like a cute childhood misunderstanding. She called my dad upstairs. I think she could tell something was wrong. Maybe it was the way I said it. Maybe it was the toy. Maybe it was the fact that I was standing there alone, talking about Santa Claus being in the house. Whatever it was, she took it seriously enough that my dad came upstairs with his gun drawn. That is another part that makes this memory feel very real. My dad did not just laugh and say I had imagined it. He came up ready to deal with an intruder. He checked the room where I had seen the man. He looked around carefully. He checked the closet. He checked to make sure the window was locked. The window was locked. That meant nobody had climbed out that way. There was no obvious escape route. There was no man hiding in the closet. No sign of anyone in the room. No open window. No broken lock. No easy explanation. If there had been a real person in that room, where did he go? How did he disappear so quickly? How did he get in? How did he get out? And why was the toy there? Those questions have stayed with me. If it had only been a strange figure seen for half a second, maybe I could explain it away. Maybe I could say I was tired, or my imagination was strong, or I saw a coat hanging in the doorway and turned it into a person in my mind. But that does not explain the stuffed toy. It does not explain the thud at the door. It does not explain why the toy was there when I opened the door. It does not explain why my mom asked where I got it from. It does not explain why my dad checked the room like someone could actually be hiding in there. And it does not explain the way the man looked at me and told me to be quiet. That part still feels wrong in a way I do not like thinking about. If it had been something friendly, why would it hide? Why would it peek from another room? Why would it lure me out with a toy? Why would it gesture for silence right before my parents came upstairs? Those are not comforting details. Those are the details that make the whole thing feel darker when I think about it as an adult. At the time, because I was young, I called him Santa Claus. That was the shape my mind gave him. That was the easiest way to understand what I had seen. White hair, beard, glasses, Santa hat, toy. Of course a child would think of Santa. But the older I got, the more I wondered if that was the point. Maybe whatever I saw wanted me to think that. Maybe it appeared in a form I would not fear immediately. A familiar form, a friendly form, something a child might follow instead of running away from. Some people I have told this story to have said it could have been a demon taking a familiar form to appear friendly. I do not know if that is true. I cannot say for sure what it was. I am not trying to claim I have all the answers. But I understand why people say that. Because when you look at the details, it does not feel like a normal Santa Claus story. It does not feel warm or magical. It feels like something pretending to be safe. The toy at the door feels like bait when I think about it now. I do not like saying that, but that is the word that comes to mind. There was a thud, I opened the door, and there was a toy waiting for me. Then, when I looked up, the man was peeking from another doorway farther down the hall. That sequence feels planned, even if I cannot explain by whom or what. The toy got me to open the door. The man got me to walk down the hall. The gesture told me to stay quiet. Then, my parents came home, and he vanished. I have no idea what would have happened if they had not come upstairs at that exact moment. That thought bothers me more than anything else. Would I have walked into the room? Would he have said something? Would he have disappeared anyway? Would I have been able to run? I do not know. Maybe nothing would have happened. Maybe I would have seen him vanish even if my parents had not arrived. But the timing has always felt strange. Right when I was standing face to face with him, right when he told me to be quiet, I heard my parents coming up the stairs. Then he was gone. It is possible that my parents coming home interrupted something. I cannot prove that, but it is how it feels when I remember it. The house was searched, and nothing was found. No stranger, no open window, no explanation. Life went on because that is what life does after strange things happen. People eventually stop talking about it every day. The house becomes normal again. You go back to using the rooms, walking the hallway, sleeping at night, and pretending everything makes sense. But memories like that do not really leave. They sit somewhere in the back of your mind and come back at random times, especially when you see the object connected to them. For me, that object is the stuffed toy. I still have it. Every time I think about that toy, I remember the thud at the door. I remember opening it and seeing the toy on the floor. I remember looking down the hallway and seeing the white-haired man in the Santa hat peeping from the other room. I remember picking up the toy and walking toward him. I remember turning the corner and seeing him fill the doorway. I remember his finger going to his mouth. I remember my mom coming upstairs and asking what I was doing. I remember turning back and seeing that he was gone. I wish I had a simple explanation. I really do. I would love to be able to say it was a prank, or a dream, or a family member dressed up, or a neighbor, or a trick of the light. But none of those answers fit. My parents were not home when it started. My dad searched the room. The window was locked. There was no one in the closet. The toy was real. And I know what I saw. Maybe it was some kind of spirit. Maybe it was something darker. Maybe it was a demon wearing a familiar face, as some people have suggested. Maybe it was something else entirely. Something I do not have the right words for. I only know that it looked like Santa Claus at first, but it did not feel like Santa Claus when I was standing in front of it. It felt too large, too quiet, too strange, and too aware. The part that makes my skin crawl the most is that he did not seem surprised to see me. He was waiting. At least that is how it felt. He was not caught off guard. He was peeking from the doorway when I first saw him, like he wanted me to notice. Then, when I came closer, he was already there in the doorway, looking down at me. And when I stood in front of him, he did not explain himself. He did not smile in a warm way. He did not say my name. He just told me to be quiet. That is not something a child forgets. I have carried that memory for years, and it still has no proper ending. My parents came home. My dad checked the room. The window was locked. The man was gone. The toy stayed. That was it. No answers, no explanation. Just a strange object. A locked room, and the memory of a giant man in a Santa hat standing in a doorway where no one should have been. That is my experience. I still do not know what was in my house that day. I only know that something made a sound at the door, left me a toy, showed itself as something familiar, and vanished the moment my parents came upstairs. I was a teenager at the time, and by that point I had been awake for around 29 hours. Not 29 hours of relaxing, lying around, and taking it easy. I mean the kind of awake where your body feels like it is running on nothing, where even your thoughts feel thin and slow, and where you are moving only because you have somehow not stopped yet. I was past tired. I was running on less than fumes. I was in that strange stage of exhaustion where you know you should sleep, but for some reason you keep going anyway. At that age, I did not think about sleep the way I do now. When you are a teenager, you can convince yourself that you are fine even when you are clearly not. You think being tired is just being tired. You think if you can still stand, talk, and drive, then you must be okay. You do not always understand that your brain can start doing strange things when it is pushed too far. You do not think about reaction time, hallucinations, or the way your mind can begin to blur the line between waking and dreaming. You just keep moving, because that is what you have been doing all day. That night, I went to an open-court basketball event at a megachurch. It was one of those open gym nights where people could show up, play, hang out, and run games for a while. Normally, that would have been fun. Basketball, friends, movement, loud shoes on the court, the sound of the ball hitting the floor, people calling for passes, all of that. But I was already so tired that I probably should not have gone in the first place. I was not rested. I was not sharp. I was just there, trying to function like a normal person while my body was quietly begging me to shut down. I remember having a cinch bag with me. It was nothing special, just a simple drawstring bag with some drinks and snacks in it. That was all I had in the car with me. No weird props, no Halloween decorations, no masks, no fake body parts, nothing that could explain what I later thought I saw. Just a bag with normal stuff inside. At the time, I did not think that detail mattered. Later, it became one of the things I kept reminding myself of, because I needed to prove to my own mind that there had not been anything in the passenger seat that could have looked like what I saw. The basketball night eventually ended, and I got into my car to leave. I was exhausted in a way that is hard to describe unless you have stayed awake too long. My eyes probably felt dry and heavy. My body was worn out from being awake and from playing basketball. My brain was not moving at full speed. I was alert enough to drive, or at least I thought I was, but I was definitely not normal. Looking back, I should not have been behind the wheel. I should have called someone, rested in the parking lot, or done anything else. But at the time, I was a teenager, and I thought I could make it home. The road leaving the megachurch was curvy. It was not some long, perfectly straight road where you could just relax and drive without thinking. It had turns, and those turns required attention. At night, with exhaustion sitting on your shoulders, every curve can feel a little heavier than it should. The headlights only show what is directly ahead, and the rest of the road disappears into darkness until you reach it. I had driven roads like that before, so I was not scared of the road itself. I was just trying to get out of there and go home. I took the first curve slowly enough, still trying to keep myself together. The car was quiet except for the usual sounds of driving. There was no one else in the passenger seat. No one in the back. Just me, my cinch bag, the drinks and snacks, and the tired silence of the car. It was the kind of quiet that can feel almost peaceful when you are normal. But when you are that sleep-deprived, it starts feeling strange. Your thoughts come in uneven pieces. Your focus shifts in and out. You are awake, but some part of your brain feels like it is already trying to dream. I was taking the very last curve out. That is when it happened. Beyond any reasonable doubt in that moment, I saw a corpse head roll from my passenger seat and fall down into the floorboard. I know how insane that sounds. I know it sounds like something from a horror movie or a nightmare, but I am telling it the way it felt when it happened. I did not see a shadow that kind of looked like a head. I did not see my bag move and imagine something. I saw what looked like a severed head. It rolled from the passenger seat like it had been sitting there beside me, and then dropped down into the footwell. It had long, dark hair, that creepy The Ring or Samara-style look, and I could see full facial features. It was not just a blur. It was not just an outline. In that split second, my brain saw a face. The sight of it was horrifying. But strangely, that was not the part that bothered me the most. The noise was worse. That is the part I still remember more clearly than anything. The sound it made did not sound like a bag sliding off a seat. It did not sound like a bottle rolling around. It did not sound like a normal object falling onto the floor of a car. The only way I can describe it is that it sounded like someone had actually ripped the head from a person's body and then thrown or rolled it onto the floorboard. It had this awful, wet, heavy, violent sound to it. It sounded real in a way that made my whole body reject it. That sound hit me deeper than the image did. The head itself was impossible, but the sound made it feel physical. It made it feel like something had actually happened inside my car. If I had only seen it, maybe I could have blinked and told myself it was a hallucination right away. But hearing it made the whole thing feel solid. It made my brain scream that something was in the car with me. Something dead. Something wrong. Something that had just rolled off the passenger seat beside me. I freaked out. I came to a stop as fast as I safely could. I do not remember every exact movement, but I remember the panic. My heart was pounding, my body was flooded with fear, and every bit of tiredness was suddenly gone in the sharpest way possible. Sleep deprivation had been dragging me down, but terror snapped me awake. I turned on every single interior light in the car. I wanted light everywhere. I did not want shadows. I did not want dark corners. I wanted to see every inch of the passenger seat, the floorboard, the back seat, my bag, everything. Then I just sat there, frozen. I could not move at first. I was too scared to reach toward the passenger side. I was too scared to look and too scared not to look. The car was lit up inside, and suddenly everything looked normal again. The passenger seat was there. The floorboard was there. My cinch bag was there. Drinks and snacks were there. No head, no blood, no body. Nothing that matched what I had just seen and heard. The inside of the car was ordinary, and that almost made it worse because my body was still reacting like I had just witnessed something impossible. I stared at the floorboard, waiting for my brain to catch up. Part of me expected the thing to still be there, tucked under the dash or half hidden by the seat. Another part of me desperately wanted it to be gone because I did not know what I would do if it was real. But there was nothing, not even an object that could easily explain it. Nothing had fallen in the way I thought I saw. Nothing looked like a head. Nothing made sense. I sat there with the interior lights on, completely frozen, trying to breathe. That kind of fear is different from ordinary fear. It was not like getting startled by someone jumping out at you. It was not like nearly hitting an animal in the road. It was the fear of seeing something your mind cannot place into reality. My brain kept trying to replay the moment and fix it into something normal, but it could not. I had seen the head roll. I had heard the sound. I had felt the panic hit me before I had time to question it. Everything about it had felt real. Eventually, after sitting there long enough to realize nothing was actually moving in the car, I started trying to explain it. The most obvious explanation was that I had hallucinated. I had been awake for 29 hours. I had been active, tired, and probably more exhausted than I wanted to admit. Later, I learned that at a certain point, deep sleep deprivation can cause your brain to enter a dreamlike state while you are still awake. Your mind can begin producing images or sounds from the same place dreams come from, except your eyes are open and you think you are fully conscious. That explanation makes sense on paper. It really does. If someone else told me this story and said they had been awake for 29 hours, I would probably tell them the same thing. I would say their brain was exhausted. I would say they experienced a waking hallucination. I would say they were basically dreaming for a moment while still driving. I would say the mind can do terrifying things when it is pushed past its limits. And maybe all of that is true. Maybe that is exactly what happened. But even knowing that does not completely settle it for me. Because in the moment, it felt real. Not kind of real. Not like a half dream where you are aware something is off. It felt completely real. The head had weight. The movement had direction. The face had features. The noise sounded physical. My body reacted before I could think, because my body believed it. That is what still bothers me. A hallucination is supposed to be something your brain makes up, but this felt like something that entered the car, made a sound, and then vanished the moment I turned on the lights. I come from an ethnicity and a background where belief in the afterlife, spirits, and ghosts is not unusual. Those ideas were not foreign to me. I grew up knowing that some people believe things can follow, appear, mess with you, or take forms that scare you. So even though I understand the sleep deprivation explanation, another part of me has always wondered if something else was going on. Maybe my exhausted state made me easier to mess with. Maybe being that tired put my mind in a place where I could see something I normally would not. Maybe it was not only in my head. I know that sounds dramatic. I know the logical explanation is that I hallucinated. But deep down, I still feel like a demon was messing with me. That is the truth of how it felt. The timing was too perfect in a horrible way. I was alone. I was exhausted. I was leaving a church of all places after a long night. I was on the last curve out, just trying to get home. Then, suddenly, the most disturbing image possible appeared right beside me. Not outside the car, not far away, but in the passenger seat next to me. It felt personal. It felt like something chose the one image that would shock my brain awake and scare me to my core. And again, the sound. I keep coming back to the sound because that is the part I cannot shake. The visual was bad enough, but the sound made it feel like an event, like something had been torn loose and dropped. It had texture to it. It had force. It sounded disgusting and heavy. I cannot fully describe it without feeling like the words are not enough. It was not a simple thump. It was not a plastic bottle hitting the floor. It sounded like a human head being ripped away and thrown down. That is not something you forget easily. After I turned on the lights and found nothing, I probably sat there longer than I needed to. I was too shaken to just start driving again immediately. I had to look around more than once. I checked the passenger seat. I checked the floorboard. I looked at the cinch bag. I tried to understand if something could have shifted or rolled in a way that made my tired brain turn it into a head. But the bag had drinks and snacks, and nothing about it explained the face or the sound. Nothing in that car should have created what I experienced. When I finally started moving again, the rest of the drive felt different. I was not just tired anymore. I was scared and wired, and every shadow inside the car seemed suspicious. I kept glancing at the passenger seat. I did not want to look down at the floorboard too long because I was driving, but I kept checking anyway. Every small noise from the car made me tense. The same car I had been sitting in normally a few minutes before now felt unsafe, like something had briefly been inside it with me. I do not remember if I told anyone right away. Maybe I did, maybe I did not. It is one of those stories that is hard to tell because it sounds ridiculous as soon as it leaves your mouth. I was sleep-deprived and saw a severed head roll off my passenger seat sounds like an obvious hallucination. Most people would not take it seriously beyond that. And to be fair, that might be the right answer. But the person hearing the story did not feel what I felt. They did not hear the noise. They did not sit frozen with all the car lights on, staring at an empty floorboard and trying to understand how something so real could leave no trace. That experience taught me how dangerous sleep deprivation can be. Even if it was all my brain, that is terrifying in its own way. It means your mind can create something so real that you will react like your life is in danger. It means you can be driving while your brain is partly dreaming. It means you can see and hear things that are not there, not as vague shapes, but as full, detailed images with sound and movement. That is a scary thought, especially because I was on the road when it happened. I could have swerved. I could have crashed. I could have hurt myself or someone else because my exhausted brain decided to show me something horrifying. But it also left me with another thought, one I cannot fully let go of. What if sleep deprivation did not create it? What if it only opened a door? What if my brain, being that tired, was in a state where I could see or hear something that normally stays hidden? I know that is not the scientific answer. I know it is not the explanation most people would accept. But when you grow up with a belief in spirits and the afterlife, those possibilities do not feel impossible. They sit in the back of your mind, especially after something that feels as real as this did. Maybe I hallucinated. Maybe my brain slipped into a REM-like state while I was still awake and turned exhaustion into a nightmare in my passenger seat. Maybe the face, the hair, the rolling motion, and that awful sound were all created inside my own head. That is probably what happened. But I still cannot say I believe that completely. Because to me, in that car, on that road, after 29 hours awake, it felt like something wanted to scare me. It felt like something knew I was weak, tired, and alone. It felt like something took a form so disturbing that even now, years later, I can remember it clearly. A corpse head, Samara-style hair, full facial features rolling from the passenger seat and hitting the floorboard with a sound I wish I had never heard. I came to a stop. I turned on every interior light. I sat there frozen, staring at nothing. And even though the official explanation is probably sleep deprivation, some part of me still believes something darker was playing with me that night. When my son was about 1 or 2 years old, he would not fall asleep anywhere except in the car. It did not matter how tired he was or how carefully I tried to settle him at home. I could rock him, hold him, dim the lights, keep the room quiet, do all the usual things parents are told to do, and he would still fight sleep. He would be exhausted, rubbing his eyes and getting cranky, but the moment I tried to put him down, he would wake back up or start crying again. It was one of those phases that felt like it would never end while I was living through it. The only thing that worked was putting him in the car seat and driving. So that became part of our routine. When he could not sleep and I was too tired to keep trying the same things over and over, I would take him out for a drive. The motion of the car would calm him down. The hum of the engine, the tires on the road, the soft darkness outside, all of it would slowly work on him until his little body finally gave in. Some nights, he would be asleep within 10 minutes. Other nights, I had to drive longer, but eventually it always worked. At the time, I did not think of it as anything unusual. It was just something I had to do as a parent to get through those long evenings. It was winter then, so it got dark early. That made the drives feel different. In summer, the same roads could feel open and normal, with lights still hanging around the fields and trees. But in winter, once the sun went down, everything outside changed fast. The country roads became dark and empty. The trees turned into black shapes, the fences were barely visible, and the headlights only showed a small piece of the world at a time. Everything outside that little cone of light felt hidden. I usually drove the same route because I knew it well. It was a rural country road in Australia, quiet and open, leading toward a national park. It was not some busy road with constant traffic or shops or people walking around. It was the kind of road where you could drive for a while and see almost nothing except farmland, trees, and the occasional house set far back from the road. I knew the bends, the long straight stretches, and the places where the road felt completely empty. That familiarity was part of why I kept using it. I did not want to think too much while driving around with a tired child in the back seat. I wanted a simple route I could follow almost without effort. The national park at the end of that road had its own kind of reputation. I had heard that the area was supposedly sacred to indigenous people. I did not know all the details, and I would never claim to fully understand the history or meaning of the place, but I knew enough to feel that the land there had a weight to it. It did not feel like just another patch of bushland or farmland. There was something about that stretch of road, especially near the park, that always felt older than the roads and houses around it. During the day, it could be beautiful. At night, especially in winter, it could feel lonely and strange. There were 2 roads that ran parallel to each other in that area, with farmland between them. If you were on one road, you could sometimes see lights on the other road across the fields. Usually that was nothing odd. A car might be driving on the other side, or someone might be moving around near a property. There were houses scattered around in places, even if they were spread out. It was rural, but not completely empty in every direction. So seeing lights in the distance was not automatically alarming. That night, I had my son in the car with me, trying to get him to sleep like I had done many times before. The car was warm against the winter cold outside. He was in the back, probably quiet by then, maybe already close to sleep. I was driving my usual route, not expecting anything. It was one of those drives where your mind is partly on the road and partly on the tired routine of parenting. I was not looking for anything strange. I was not trying to scare myself. I was just driving, hoping the trip would settle him. As I drove along, I noticed lights on the parallel road across the farmland. At first, I thought it was probably a car. The lights were very bright, brighter than normal headlights, so my first guess was that maybe it was someone with hunting lights or some kind of powerful spotlight. In rural areas, you see things like that sometimes. People drive around properties, check on animals, work late, or use bright lights for whatever they are doing. It was noticeable, but not immediately terrifying. Strange, maybe, but not enough to make me panic. I remember thinking that it was probably just someone driving home or moving around near one of the houses. The lights were across the farmland, on the other road, and they were not close to me at first. They were bright enough to catch my attention, but I had no reason yet to think they were anything other than a vehicle. So I kept driving. I did not stop. I did not turn around. I did not even feel scared at that first moment. I just noticed them and continued down the road. Then everything changed in what felt like only a couple of seconds. One moment, the lights were over on the parallel road. The next moment, they were directly behind me. I do not mean they slowly came around a corner and ended up behind me in a normal way. I mean it felt like they were suddenly there, right behind my car, on the same road as me. I was still driving the same route, still on a road where the speed limit was 100 kilometers per hour. And somehow those lights had gone from being off to the side across farmland to being right behind me. They were coming up fast, much faster than they should have been. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it in the normal way. Maybe there was a connecting road I had not noticed. Maybe the car had turned somewhere behind me. Maybe I had misjudged where the lights were. But I knew that road. I had driven it again and again. There was nowhere obvious for a vehicle to have crossed over that quickly. There was farmland between the roads. There were no streets in that exact spot where they could have turned onto my road. No easy explanation fit. The lights behind me were incredibly bright. They filled every mirror. My rearview mirror was flooded with white light. My side mirrors were glowing with it too. It was so strong that I could not see anything else behind me. I could not see the shape of a car. I could not see a bonnet, a windscreen, or the outline of a vehicle. I could not see whether it was a truck, a ute, a car, or anything normal. All I could see was light. It was like the darkness behind me had been swallowed by it. That was when fear hit me properly. My heart started pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I had my baby in the car, and that made the fear so much worse. If I had been alone, I still would have been scared. But having my son in the back seat changed everything. Suddenly, it was not just about me. I had this tiny child strapped into his seat, completely helpless, probably asleep or almost asleep, and something I could not understand was rushing up behind us in the dark. Every protective instinct in me switched on at once. I started speeding. I do not even remember deciding to do it. My foot just pressed harder on the accelerator because the only thought in my head was to get away. I wanted to reach the suburbs, where there were streetlights, houses, and other people. I wanted to get out of that dark rural stretch and back somewhere that felt normal. The road ahead seemed too long. Every second felt stretched out. The lights behind me were so bright that they made it hard to focus, and yet I did not dare slow down. I kept glancing in the mirrors, even though I hated looking. Each time I looked, the lights seemed to be there, filling everything, gaining on me or staying far too close. There was no sound that I clearly remember. No engine roar, no horn, no tires, nothing that made it feel like a normal vehicle chasing me. It was just light, bright, overwhelming light. That made it even more frightening because it gave me nothing to identify. If it had been a normal car driving aggressively, that would have been scary, but at least I could have understood it. A person being stupid, a driver being reckless, someone tailgating. But this felt different. The road was still dark ahead of me. The headlights of my own car showed the lane, the edges of the road, and little bits of the countryside as I passed. Everything outside the road looked empty. No houses close enough to help. No side streets. No safe place to pull over. I was trapped in motion, moving forward, because there was nothing else I could do. Stopping did not feel like an option. Pulling over with my baby in the car while those lights came up behind me was unthinkable. The closer I got to the suburb, the more desperate I felt. I knew that once I reached the area with streetlights, there would be more visibility. Maybe there would be other cars. Maybe the lights behind me would turn off, slow down, or reveal themselves as something normal. I kept telling myself to just get there. Just reach the lights. Just get to where there are houses. Just keep driving. My breathing was fast by then. My whole body was tense. My hands were tight on the steering wheel. I was trying to drive safely, but fear was pushing me hard. I was scared of crashing, scared of whatever was behind me, scared of making one wrong move with my son in the car. It felt like the road was suddenly much narrower than usual, even though it was the same road I had driven so many times. The darkness pressed in from both sides, and the lights behind me made it feel like I was being forced forward. Then I looked back again. The lights were gone. Not dimmer. Not farther away. Not turning off onto another road. Gone, there was absolutely nothing behind me. The mirrors that had been completely filled with blinding light were suddenly dark. I could see the road behind me again, empty and black. There was no car falling back into the distance. No headlights turning down a driveway. No vehicle parked on the side of the road. No glow disappearing behind trees. Nothing. It was like whatever had been behind me had simply vanished. That was almost worse than if it had stayed there. If I had looked back and seen a car turning into a property, I could have explained it. If the lights had slowed down or passed me, I could have at least said it was some kind of vehicle. If there had been a side road, I could have told myself they turned off. But there was nowhere for them to go. I knew that stretch. There were no houses right there. No streets to turn down. No obvious driveway that made sense. One moment, the lights were consuming every mirror, and the next moment, the road behind me was empty. I kept driving because I did not know what else to do. I was too scared to stop. I was too scared to turn around. I just wanted to get home. But now, my fear had changed. Before, I was afraid of being followed. Now I was afraid because I did not understand what had followed me, or if it had followed me at all. My brain could not settle on an answer. A normal car could not have moved like that. Normal headlights could not just disappear with nowhere to turn. And yet I had seen them. I had watched them fill my mirrors. I had felt the panic in my body as they got closer. By the time I got home, I was absolutely panicking. I was out of breath, shaken, and struggling to calm down. It felt like I had run a long distance, even though I had only been driving. My heart was still pounding, and I could not stop thinking about the lights. I brought my son inside, but even being home did not make me feel safe right away. The house was familiar, But my mind was still back on that road, still seeing the mirrors filled with bright light, still trying to understand how something could be there 1 second and gone the next. I had no idea what I had just experienced. For a long time, I did not have a name for it. I could tell the story, but I could not explain it. It sounded strange even to me. Lights on a parallel road. 2 seconds later, lights directly behind me. Too bright to see anything else. No vehicle visible. No place for them to go. Then, nothing. It felt unbelievable, but I knew it had happened. I remembered the fear too clearly. I remembered the way those lights filled my mirrors too clearly. I remembered the empty road behind me after they vanished. Years later, someone told me a story about Min lights. Before that, I either had not heard of them or had not paid much attention. But when I heard about them, something in me reacted. The stories people told sounded different from each other, but there was always this idea of strange lights appearing in remote areas, sometimes seeming to follow people, sometimes moving in ways that did not make sense, sometimes vanishing without explanation. People have had all kinds of experiences with them, and not everyone describes them the same way. Some say they appear far away. Some say they come closer. Some say they feel like they are being chased or watched. Some people believe there are natural explanations, and others believe they are something older or stranger. When I heard those stories, I immediately thought of that night. I cannot prove that what I saw was a Min light. I cannot prove anything about it. But deep down, that is what I feel it was. It fits the feeling of the experience better than anything else I have heard. The way the lights appeared in one place, then seemed to be behind me almost instantly. The way they were too bright and too strange to identify. The way they filled the mirrors and then vanished where there was nowhere to go. The way the whole thing happened out on a rural road near land that already had a sacred reputation. All of it feels connected in a way I cannot fully explain. What still bothers me most is how fast it happened. If the lights had stayed on the parallel road, I would have forgotten about them. If a normal car had come up behind me from a side road, I would have been annoyed or scared for a minute. But then, I would have understood it. But there was no normal transition. The lights were over there. And then, they were behind me. That is the part my mind cannot fix. The distance, the farmland between the roads, the lack of places to turn, none of it works. I have replayed that road in my head many times. I have tried to remember if there was any hidden driveway, any track, any way a car could have crossed over. But even if there had been some rough farm access road, it still would not explain how quickly the lights appeared behind me, or why I could not see any vehicle shape, or where they went afterward. It was not just that I got spooked by bright headlights. It was the whole sequence of events that made no sense. After that night, I never went down that road again. I know some people might think that is extreme. They might say it was probably just another car, or that fear made it seem stranger than it was. Maybe they are right. Maybe there is a normal explanation that I missed because I was tired, it was dark, and I was already focused on my son. I have considered that. I am not someone who wants every strange thing to be supernatural. But I also know what it felt like to be there. And I know how impossible it seemed when the lights disappeared. The memory stayed with me because it was not just scary in a simple way. It was not like seeing an animal run across the road or nearly having an accident. It was the kind of fear that comes from realizing something is happening around you that does not follow the rules you understand. Roads, cars, lights, distance, turns, all of those things are supposed to make sense. That night, they did not. The lights behaved like they were not bound by the same space I was driving through. And I was not alone in the car. That is the part that makes the memory heavier. My son was there, tiny and unaware, depending on me to keep him safe. He did not know what was happening. He did not know why my heart was racing or why I was speeding toward the suburbs. He was just a little child in the back seat, probably calm, because the car was doing what it always did for him. Meanwhile, I was in the front seat, feeling like something unknown had locked onto us in the dark. I still remember the relief and panic mixing together when the lights vanished. Relief because they were gone. Panic because there was no reason they should have been gone. It was like escaping something, and only then realizing you did not know what you had escaped from. I did not get answers. I just got distance. I got home. That was all. Even now, when I think about that stretch of road, I picture the farmland between the two parallel roads, the darkness of the winter evening, and the national park beyond it. I picture the first moment I saw the bright lights and brushed them off as hunters or someone driving home. Then I picture the mirrors filling with white light so completely that the whole world behind me disappeared. I picture my own panic, the road ahead, and the feeling that I had to get us to the streetlights before whatever it was reached us. Then I picture looking back and seeing nothing at all. That is why I believe it was something like the Min Min lights, not because I have proof, but because no ordinary explanation has ever felt right. It was there, it followed, and then it vanished. It left no sound, no vehicle, no trace, and no answer. Just fear, confusion, and a memory strong enough that years later, I still will not drive that road. I had taken that route countless times before just to help my son fall asleep. It had been familiar, routine, almost comforting. After that night, it became something else completely. It became the road where the lights came after me, the road where the mirrors turned white, the road where something impossible seemed to close the distance in seconds and then disappear into nowhere. I never needed to see it again to believe it happened. Once was enough.